This is Big Podcast.
Build a Big Podcast. David Hooper with you. Marketing is what we do here. We're talking about growing your audience, spreading your message, making money with your podcast, making podcasts that people care about. Rarely ever do I talk about tech. So if you're here because you wonder, what microphone should I use? This is not the podcast for you. However, I'm going to give you the answer very quickly. The microphone that you should use is the one that you've got. Do not let the fact that you do not have the perfect microphone or the latest microphone or the most expensive microphone keep you from doing your podcast. Start working on your skills now. I can help you with that. Upgrade your microphone when you can. That's the answer. This episode brought to you by Riverside.fm. It is the leading platform to record studio quality remote podcast and video. Don't have the perfect microphone? That's all right. Riverside can work with that. They're used by over 70,000 creators and companies like the New York Times and Spotify. Riverside records locally on each participant's computer, then uploads it to the cloud. Then you download it back to your computer. You can do all your fancy editing, make it sound really good. It's super intuitive. It's easy to use. Guests don't need to install anything. That's what I love about it. You know the tech. They don't know the tech. What do? Send them a link to Riverside. It loads up on the Chrome browser. Boom. They're in the studio with you. They're sounding great. You're sounding great. You've got a good sounding podcast. It's really easy, really powerful. And right now you can try it for free. If you go to riverside.fm, they'll give you a couple hours to play with it. Look under the hood, see if it works for you. I'm so confident that it will. I'm going to go ahead and give you a discount code. It's going to get you 15% off. If you want to stick around, Big Podcast. That's the code, BIGPODCAST. Remember it, riverside.fm. Take those 2 hours for free. And when you're ready to buy, Big Podcast. That'll get you 15% off. BIGPODCAST. Riverside.fm. One of the things that I try to do on this podcast is I try to answer questions that have been sent in via Twitter, via Mastodon, via the website at bigpodcast.com. I want to make sure that you have the tools that you need to spread your message, to help people, to make impact, to make a podcast that matters. We can talk all day about how we like podcasting and how if it's just one person that listens to it, if I can just change one person, it's all worth it. Yeah, it can be. But what if you could change 2-3 people, 200 or 300 people, 2,000 or 3,000 people? You can do that. I want to help you do that. And to help you do that, I answer questions here. I also take feedback on how to make the episodes better. And this week, I got an email from Dan B. Dan filled out the form at bigpodcast.com, and this is the message that he sent me. Hi, David. I love your Big Podcast book and will be using it as a constant reference for my upcoming podcast. I also bought your 101 episode templates book. Your podcast is the only one I listen to regarding how to podcast. And as a marketer, I love that you built your show around the marketing perspective. All right, I'm going to break in there. If you think that I'm going with, hey, Dan B loves this podcast. Yeah, the first 2 paragraphs. Then this email takes a turn. He says, I wanted to voice a frustration I've had listening to your podcast recently regarding your insider issue episodes. If you go back to the previous episode, you'll hear what he's talking about. That's the audio edition of my weekly newsletter. That newsletter, if you want to see that, subscribe to it, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. It's free. Check it out before you subscribe if you want to subscribe. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're like, Dan, he doesn't like the audio edition, the insider issue episodes. Here's what he says. He says, like a lot of people, I rotate my listening habits around a handful of shows, including yours. I haven't listened to your show in a while, so I've been binging recently in my car. I rarely listen to shows at home. 99% of the time is while I'm driving. I'm going to break in there again. That's super important for you to consider. This is one of the things that I say at the end of every episode. I want you to have this podcast on your phone because I know if you do, if you're like Dan, it's going to make it easier for you to access the podcast when you're actually able to listen to it. And for a lot of times, that's people in their cars. It's when people are at the gym. It's not necessarily sitting at a computer, going to the website, in this case, podcast.bigpodcast.com. Very few listens are on that website. That website is strictly for more information. One of the things that I do to get more people like Dan listening in his car, if you go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe, I've got a button just for iPhone. I've got a button just for Android devices. But what works best for me, and will work best for you as far as actually getting somebody on their phone, is to have a QR code on your subscribe page. If you go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe, you will see how I do this. It's very easy to do. Feel free to swipe the copy. Feel free to swipe the page. Put your own links in there, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Anyway, back to Dan's email. It says, unfortunately, your insider issue episodes are slowly sucking the life out of me. I don't know how everyone else listens to podcasts, but I don't know anyone who listens while reading and accompanying. That's a tough one for me to say, Dan. An accompanying transcript or book or newsletter. And that's the problem. In my car, I'm loving the information, but you always stop short of providing any actual content meat in the insider issue shows. Every vignette ends with, sorry for the frustrating open loop, but you'll have to remember to go read the newsletter later to get the payoff for the big tease that I just laid on you. At least that's how it sounds in my head, over and over and over again. Okay, fair comment. Let me explain what I'm doing on these insider issues. If you go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com, that's the newsletter website, and that's the newsletter that he's talking about. So go there, even though I know Dan's like, hey, man, I'm sick of you sending people to that site. I'm going to do it one more time so you know what I'm talking about. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You will see the weekly newsletter that goes out, and what I will do is I will take 4 or 5 different things. I will comment on them, and I will link to them. So they're not necessarily things that I have written. They're things other people have written. What I'll do is I will say, here's how to use this tool. Here's what I think about this situation in the podcasting industry. Here's how I would modify what this guy is saying for newsletters or for email to make it work for your podcast. So that's kind of the balance that I'm striking. I'm taking other people's content, I'm curating it, things that are sometimes from other industries, and I'm making them work for podcasting. What he's talking about is over and over and over again. Like I said, there are 4 or 5 things that I'm going over in each episode. And to make it easy on you, I don't want you to go to 4 or 5 different places or have to remember 4 or 5 different places to go to. I've got one solution for you. I've got one website. It's newsletter.bigpodcast.com. I send you there, and then you can pick the different places that you want to go. And I do that because I understand that people are like Dan in their car at the gym. They're not necessarily at a place where you can write something down or think, hey, I'll get back to that later. What you know, though, is when you hear an insider episode, you know that if you go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com, whatever it is that I was talking about is going to be there on that front page. Anyway, let's get back to Dan. He said, you go through stretches where the II shows, that's the insider shows, are back to back or every other episode. It's actually mentally painful to listen to because I know I won't remember to dig up those old newsletter issues later, and I'll never get to the big payoff. I'm guessing these shows work wonders for building your email list or traffic to your site, which I totally get, but I'm on the verge of unsubscribing because I listen to podcasts to learn stuff, not to be read a table of contents and then told to go to the library to get the actual info. Sorry for the rant. Hope you get my point. I'm definitely not the expert when it comes to podcasting, but I couldn't imagine sharing these episodes with anyone because they have no substance. They're just a big tease. I'm probably not the only one. And then in brackets, he says, for every vocal person, there's probably 20 more silent ones with the same issue. But you obviously haven't gotten enough pushback on these episodes to make the change yet. So as not to bring an issue without also bringing a solution, my hope is that you start to give the whole story for all these great topics and then incentivize people to go to the newsletter site to get the links and maybe some non-episode specific free bonuses instead of having to go to your site to get the meat. Because I might listen to 3 or 4 of your episodes while I'm driving, but it's hard to skip the insider issues while driving. There's no way I will remember or take the time to go to the site. In my mind, podcasts are made to be listened to, not read. At least that's my theory. You're a super smart podcaster, so I'm assuming the benefits of list building and traffic outweigh the occasional frustrated listener. Rant over. Bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, your book is the Bible of podcasting. Despite the above, I still have tons of respect and appreciation for what you do. I'm looking forward to what you do next. Best, Dan. Dan's bringing up some great points. And if you go to the last episode that I did, the previous one to this one, you'll hear that same format where I'm going through each of these articles. But what I'm doing based on Dan's feedback, and I don't need 20 or 30 people to tell me the same thing. When I get something that makes sense to me, I say, okay, yeah, that would actually work. I'm going to use that. Based on his feedback, what I did on the previous episode is when I was going through that list of articles, I decided to add more information in the podcast to make it more complete. So if I say, hey, I've got 4 steps to doing blank, I'm going to give you the 4 steps. I'm going to give you my take on each of those 4 steps. And then I'm going to say, if you'd like more information on each of those 4 steps, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. And I was doing that more or less, I don't know, I would say 80% of the time previously. What I'm doing from now moving forward, if I've got something like that, making sure that I do it 100% of the time, it's not going to work for everything that I cover. For example, one of the things that I had in the last issue, I've got a 67-page YouTube guide for podcasting using YouTube. My job in mentioning it in the newsletter and also in the podcast edition of the newsletter was just to let you know that it is there. What I plan to do is go through those 67 pages, find the highlights, and then bring them to the podcast. Me covering 67 pages within that newsletter format, that's going to be a really long podcast. And I couldn't get to it in a timely manner. I felt it was more important for me to let you know about it now so you can take action on it. Then I'll come in with some more thoughts on it. Maybe you've got more thoughts on it. That's probably how I could improve that last episode. Say, hey, if you read this and you've got thoughts on it, reach out to me. I think I did that, but I'm not sure. Anyway, if I didn't, you go back to that last episode, you get this 67-page guide from YouTube, and you do have thoughts on it, do reach out to me because I'm working on an episode about that. But I think this is good feedback from Dan. I think feedback is one of those things that as podcasters, any creative people, we see things about our own work that people who consume the work do not. We know about the pre-episode prep. We know about the editing, all the things that happen before the episode gets released. We know about how much time, money, effort, blood, sweat, tears, whatever we're investing into it. And that is not always obvious from the people who consume our stuff. A funny example that happens all the time whenever I release a new book, and this book that he's talking about, the big podcast book, it took about 4 years to write. It's 492 pages, about 93,000 words. I will release a book like that, big project, and within a couple weeks, somebody's like, hey, great book. When's the next one coming out? It seems like it happened quickly, and maybe it seems like it happened easily. I hope that I can make it look easy. But most of the time, it's not easy. And you know this because you're a podcaster. You're creating something. So when you have somebody come in and give you feedback on it, your first reaction may be to say, whoa, Dan, pump the brakes, buddy. You don't know what I'm doing. You don't understand how I feel, how much blood, sweat, tears, emotion, money, energy that I've put into this thing. Give me a break, man. You could do that. What I tried to do when I'm getting feedback, and I think this was some great feedback, Dan didn't hold back. He let me know what he wanted, but he was also very kind. And I think maybe that's a lesson there too. If you go to Toastmasters, have you ever done that? You should as a podcaster. It is a great way to work on your public speaking skills. And they have something called the CRE method. CRE, commendation, recommendation, encouragement. CRE is basically starting with something that you like. And Dan did that. He said, I love your big podcast book and will be using it as a constant reference for my upcoming podcast. All right, good. I'm paying attention. And then the recommendation. I wanted to voice a frustration that I've had listening to your podcast recently regarding your Insider Issue episodes. One of the things that we don't think about because we are in that mode of creating, not consuming our own content, is that there are a variety of ways that people can consume our content. Maybe people are like Dan, and this often happens when somebody has just found a podcast. They really love it, and they download a ton of episodes and listen to them back to back. This is one of the reasons that I talk about actually in the book, Big Podcast, one of the more controversial things. I talk about launching with 25 episodes. People say, by God, 25 episodes? That's insane. It'll take me forever to do 25 episodes. Okay, so it does. But if you're in a situation like Dan, where you're in the car you're going to want to listen to more and more and more, not just 1 or 2 episodes. So by giving somebody like Dan more and more and more, if he doesn't blow through the thing and get sick of it, which that's another thing, and I'll get to that in a second, he's invested. He started to make this a routine, and he's going to come back to you week after week after week. Now, when it comes to blowing through everything at once, getting overexposed to the same type of episodes, that can be an issue. This is one of the reasons why you never, ever, ever want to pre-record your intro. You never, ever, ever want to pre-record a commercial. And I get it, dynamic advertising, whatever. I understand the value of that. But if you've got somebody who's going back to back to back to back with your episodes, and they're hearing that pre-recorded intro, you say the exact same thing in the same way. And we do that anyway. I did that on this episode. Hey, it's David Hooper, big podcast. This is the you've heard that a bajillion times. At the end, when I tell you to subscribe, you've heard that a bajillion times. I've got 3 ways for you to subscribe, 1 for Android, 1 for iPhone. You've heard that. But it's not the exact same inflection. It's not the exact same words. It's similar, but different. If you're going back to back to back to back, and you've got a recording that's the exact same words, the exact same inflection, the exact same pacing, you are going to know that, and that is going to be less interesting than somebody saying the exact same words, different inflection, a little bit different tone. You got to think about that. This is how people are consuming your podcast. It is not done in the same way that you are creating your podcast. And the same thing goes for formats. I can see if you were taking those insider episodes back to back to back, that would be an issue because every 3 to 5 minutes, I'm going through one of these articles, maybe not giving the complete story, giving enough of it, but still could do a better job on that, like I mentioned. And then I say, for more information, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You're like, oh my God, blowing it out, dude. 3 or 4 of those episodes in a row, I can imagine that would be a lot. And he mentioned this, sometimes I'm back to back on those insider episodes. There is not a traditional episode like this one in between those. I've kind of slacked off on that in the last couple of months. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'm trying to get another book out, Big Podcast Launch Plan. That is coming soon. So I'm not podcasting as much as I want to. But it's good feedback that I not only need to put an episode like this in between those other episodes, the insider episodes, maybe 2 of those episodes in between the insider episodes. So anyway, this is good feedback from Dan. I appreciate you, Dan. Thank you for listening. Thank you for buying the books. And thanks for your support of Big Podcast. I hope you do stick around. I'm excited to see what you do with your upcoming podcast. If you're like Dan, you've got feedback, I'm certainly open to that. If you've got questions, I need to do more episodes apparently. So if you've got questions, that's an easy way for me to put these in between those insider episodes, get you the information that you want. That is my goal, is I want to help you spread a message. I want to help you have impact with your podcast. Something I realized just today, I've got a folder where I keep all these episodes. And I clicked on the wrong thing. I think it alphabetized them or set them up by date, something like that. And I was getting them back in order. And I clicked on the date, so it sorted them by date. I wanted the latest one. That's what I wanted. But it went back to the first one. And what I realized is that I've been doing Build a Big Podcast. Initially, it was called Big Podcast Daily. I was doing it daily. But I've been doing this for 5 years. And I'm going to end with this because this connects with what I just talked about helping you spread your message, helping you have more success with your podcast, make impact with the world, make the world a better place. I got into this as a complete fluke. You've heard me talk about this if you've listened to previous episodes, if you've read the book. I've got a lot of music business examples, and that's because I worked in the music business for 20, 25 years. I'm still working in the music business, arguably, because I'm still doing broadcasting for the music industry. But prior to that, prior to my podcasting and broadcasting work, I was in the trenches doing music marketing, growing audiences, selling records, getting people to live events. I got burnt out on it. It's not that I think that music is not important, but I wanted to do something with more impact on the world as far as helping people like you spread messages. I've talked about Zeta Christian. My spouse has dementia. Advice for caregivers, people who are taking care of people with dementia. And this stuff is important. I got a message today from a friend. Her mother seems to have dementia. And you know these calls that you get? A lot of them come from India. They pretend to be the IRS, or maybe there's some kind of weird tech support thing. Anyway, you end up paying these bills with gift cards. And this woman, I don't know how it happened, but they got her Amazon password and they bought gift certificates. They got her to go to a store, and I know she got taken for $400. In addition to that, got her to go to the bank where she withdrew $7,000 and was on her way to buy more gift cards. Getting the word out about things like that, that's important to me. And we've all got messages like that. Important things for people to know that will make their lives better. I could not do that in the music industry. So not that music wasn't important, not that it doesn't help people or entertain people or make the world a better place, but it's these little bitty one-to-one messages. That's what I really want to focus on now. That's what I'm doing. I thank you for listening. I've got some great stuff coming up. And now that part of the episode where I say the same thing that you've heard a million times, but I say it just a little bit differently, because if you're listening to those back-to-back-to-back episodes, I want you to keep listening because I want you to do this right now. And that is subscribe to this podcast. If you want to hear more of these episodes, including the insider episodes, some of them back-to-back, but also episodes like this, also the Q&A episodes, send me those questions. I will answer them here on the podcast. You need to do this. You need to subscribe. And you do that by going to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. How many buttons? 3 buttons. One for Android, one for iPhone, one of them an RSS feed. So however you're getting your podcast, I'm going to get it delivered to you. I want it on your phone. I want you to be listening like Dan in your car, back to back or not, just listen to it whenever you can. And this is the easiest way that you can do that. When you go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe, there is a QR code there. You know what I'm talking about. Pull out your phone, scan it. It will run you through the process of getting Build a Big Podcast on your phone so you can listen to it in the car. You can listen to it in the gym. You can listen to it wherever you go. That's bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Again, while you were there, steal the copy, man. Steal the copy, steal the process. Do this with your podcast. This will help you spread your message via podcasting. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That is how to do it. Thank you for listening. Dan, thank you for your letter. I will see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.